Christmas lights glow everywhere, but inside you, something goes quiet. The world feels loud about joy and strangely silent about you. You notice it in small moments: crowded streets, familiar songs, and the feeling that you're watching life from behind glass. You smile when you're supposed to, not because you feel it, but because you've learned the timing. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because everyone else seems to belong somewhere tonight. You tell yourself it's just a day. Just another date on the calendar, pretending to matter more. But your body doesn't agree. It tightens. It remembers. You feel heavier at night. Not sad in a dramatic way, just quietly displaced. And here's what you never noticed. It's not the loneliness that hurts most, it's the contrast. Warm windows, cold sidewalks, you moving between them without an invitation. You don't envy the laughter. You envy the ease. The way people lean into each other without thinking. The way no one asks if they're allowed to stay. This is where most people misunderstand themselves. They think this pain means something is wrong with them. So you start scanning yourself for flaws. Too quiet, too distant, too much, too little. But here's the truth hiding in plain sight. This wasn't your personality. It was survival. At some point, being alone became safer, quieter, predictable. The sudden disappointments. No emotional debts you couldn't repay. Your nervous system learned this before you did. You didn't choose this. Your nervous system did. And Christmas presses directly on that memory. Togetherness becomes a spotlight you can't step out of. You feel exposed without doing anything wrong. Just existing feels like standing in the wrong room. Here's the painful part. You don't miss people as much as you miss feeling chosen. Chosen without effort, without proving, without shrinking or performing. And this explains why it never changed. Because you stopped expecting that kind of safety long ago. You became independent in the way people admire. But independence came with a quiet cost. You learned not to lean, not to ask, not to need. And during the rest of the year, that works. But holidays remove the distractions. They slow everything down. And whatever you've been outrunning finally catches up. You sit with yourself longer than usual. Silence stops being a choice. This is where the mind starts telling stories. Not kind ones, familiar ones. That you're hard to love. That you missed your chance. That something about you doesn't fit. But these thoughts aren't truths. They're habits. Mental shortcuts built to explain pain quickly. So you wouldn't stay in it too long. What saved you once is hurting you now. Self-containment turned into isolation. You don't ache because you're broken. You ache because connection mattered to you. And that matters. Even if no one ever taught you how to hold it safely. You learn distance, not intimacy. Control, not comfort. So when Christmas asks you to soften, your body resists before your mind understands. This isn't weakness. It's conditioning. A system trained to survive without witnesses, without reassurance. And here's the quiet shift. Loneliness stops feeling like a flaw and starts feeling like a signal. Not that you failed at closeness, but that closeness once failed you. That realization changes the tone of the room. You stop interrogating yourself and start listening instead. Because pain that repeats is rarely random. It's patterned, learned. You weren't always this guarded. You became this way when openness stopped being safe. And Christmas highlights that fracture. It celebrates attachment without acknowledging its cost. You're surrounded by images of closeness, but no language for people who learned distance first. Here's the painful part. Your loneliness isn't about being alone tonight. It's about how long you've been carrying things by yourself. Without pause, without relief, self-reliance became your identity. And identities are hard to loosen, even when they hurt. You learned to be low maintenance. Easy to be around, easy to leave. And this explains why connection feels exhausting. Because it asks you to unlearn your armor. Your nervous system still expects loss. So it prepares distance in advance. Not because you're pessimistic, but because predictability once kept you safe. What saved you once is hurting you now. Protection slowly turned into isolation, and during Christmas, that isolation echoes louder. Because the world slows, and there's nowhere to hide. You notice the absence more clearly. Not of people of being seen. Seen without explanation, without usefulness, without having to be strong. This is where the grief lives. Not in loneliness, but in delayed connection. You didn't lose something you had. You lost something you never got to practice safely. And that confusion hurts in a specific way. Because you can't point to a single memory and blame it. Instead, it's everywhere. In your habits, your thinking, your silence. Here's the shift most people never reach. Loneliness stops being an enemy. It becomes information. A signal from a system that adapted too early. You weren't defective. You were precise. You adjusted to what you were given, even when it wasn't enough. And Christmas doesn't create the pain. It reveals what's already there. That quiet longing isn't weakness. It's evidence you're still capable of attachment. Your nervous system hasn't shut down. It's been waiting. Waiting for safety that doesn't demand performance. Waiting for closeness without conditions. And maybe that's why this season hurts. Because it brushes against something unfinished. Not broken. Unresolved. You don't need to force meaning into tonight. You don't need to fix anything. Just noticing changes the shape of the pain. It becomes quieter. Less personal. Just noticing changes the shape of the pain. It becomes quieter. Less personal. That distinction matters. It always did. Christmas doesn't require happiness. It exposes readiness. And maybe you're not ready for noise. Maybe you're ready for honesty. Honesty about how you learned to survive, and what survival quietly took from you. This isn't the end of the story. It's the moment the story becomes accurate. You're not behind. You're early in a different direction. And in that quiet clarity, Christmas stops feeling like a verdict. If this video felt uncomfortably familiar, thank you for staying until the end. Subscribe if you want more reflections like this, and write your thoughts in the comments. You're not alone in what you felt here.